It's Valentine's Day. And in the spirit of Valentine's Day, we're going to be talking about love. Well, more specifically, we're going to be talking about what some would consider to be one of the initial stages of love, dating. Now, dating is something that you all probably experienced in one way or another. Now, and depending on what generation you're from, you experienced it very differently to the others. And today we're going to be talking about how it's changed over generations, what's happening today, and what it means for the future. Hello, everybody. My name is Lakshan, and I'm your host for this episode.
And I'm Goldie, and this is episode 21 of mine, the Gen Gap podcast.
Now, while there's so much we can talk about when it comes to this topic of dating, in this episode, we're going to be talking about three things. The first one is how relationships and dating has evolved across generations and how it's shifted expectations in relationships. Second one being the role of technology in dating today. And the third one being the lessons from each generation and what the future potentially looks like. Since today's episode is all about dating and love, we would love for you to show your love by subscribing to this podcast and leaving a like if you're watching us on YouTube, and leaving us a 5-star review and following us on Spotify or any other audio platform. Let's jump into the first part of this episode, which is on the evolution of dating across generations and how expectations have shifted with respect to what a relationship is. Dating has come a long way, from formal courtship to swiping right or left. Let's talk about how each generation approaches love. Baby boomers had a very conservative approach to dating and relationships. They met potential partners through social circles, school, college, university, neighbors, friends, or family. In India, there was no dating per se. It was primarily arranged marriages where parents and extended family did the matchmaking after considering caste, religion, family background, horoscope, and education. The intention to date was eventually to marry, have children, and build a future together. Things started to shift with Gen X, who had this element of choice introduced to them through personal ads and matrimonial services. In India, love marriages started becoming more prevalent, even though there was still a lot of resistance and pushback from families. The intention was dating to explore individuality, career compatibility, and then marriage. And there was also this element of caution because globally, Gen X were the first generation to witness divorce. Everything took a turn with millennials. The internet started playing its role in dating along with globalization and urbanization in India. And in India, the concept of love marriages started becoming a lot more accepted, particularly in the urban settings. The use of social media sites like Facebook and dating apps like Tinder started becoming very prevalent as well. The intention was dating for shared experiences with the attitude towards marriage and children moving towards maybe someday. And this was likely because dating apps had made meeting people easier, but paradoxically, made commitment harder. And with Gen Z, dating became highly influenced by social media and dating apps. Non traditional relationships became more accepted across the world, and so did love marriages in India. The focus with this generation is on emotional connection, authenticity, and mental health compatibility. This was the generation that made situationships a thing. The intention of dating was and is for connection. Goldie, you've experienced and witnessed life way more than I have. Maybe not way more, but more enough. What have you noticed in terms of the attitude towards dating and relationship with respect to each of these generations?
I It's a tricky question you ask, actually, because whilst I can only really speak from my own experience or what I've witnessed, as you mentioned, the variables that describe each generation and sort of the context in which dating has evolved, what keeps coming up for me is this idea of pressure, the pressure to find someone, but the circumstances have changed. It's not a secret that we've always wanted to find a companion. We've looked forward to finding that special someone. Maybe for a boomer, it wasn't spoken of as dating. It was just about finding the right partner to spend the rest of your life with. But there was a certain excitement there, wasn't there, even back then? And today, Gen Z have available so much access to different profiles in this case, right? Through apps, social media, the technology has facilitated that. But what I notice is this big difference in the pressure. There's always been a pressure to find someone, but today, Gen Z and their younger, you know, companions and friends have another type of pressure added, which is to look a certain way and to appear in a certain manner because they get filtered out, whether it's right or a left. So that's what I'm noticing as a big difference. This idea of having to be someone that is perfectly curated versus this organic, authentic self that just shows up to meet you in the park for a coffee. And there's no element of, I think, surprise as well is coming up for me. There was a lot more surprise back then. There was a lot more aha moment because you hadn't seen the person. Yet today, you've probably seen, as we call their profile, their pictures, what hobbies they have. You've already created an impression. And as we know, first impressions, sadly, can be last impressions.
Yeah. And as you were sharing this, Goldie, I was just thinking about how in like the like 2010s, I don't know if it's as prevalent now, but definitely in the 2010s, mid 2010s, there was this emergence of like dating coaches and stuff. And I don't know if it was the same with women, but definitely with men who are teaching other men on exactly what they have to or how to curate their profile on Tinder or any of these social media apps to get a match, right? So it's like you do all these things to get a match, and the idea is not to meet who you want to meet. It is to meet anybody, just anybody who comes my way, I'll take it, right?
Yeah.
And I was looking at some of the statistics with respect to these dating apps, and it's interesting to say the least. I think maybe that's an episode for a different day. But you're right, that element of surprise, the whole getting to know each other from scratch, barely knowing anything about each other, and discovering. It's like a shared discovery almost, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. I think the pressure of just having to look a certain way before you've met the person is what tends to sort of not ruin things, but adds a layer of uncertainty, which you could otherwise have in a more organic and natural way. Yeah.
Yeah. And there is this concept of catfishing. Do you know what that is?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's
That's
another thing. It's
scary.
like, yeah, oh yeah,
Yeah.
it's quite a prevalent thing. I don't know if it again if it still is in 2025, but I know it's been quite a popular thing for a few years prior to this, at least.
Yeah, yeah, it has. And there's very well made documentary on this on Netflix, which I recently watched. And this covers the era of when Facebook was a very popular platform for catfishing. And it specifically covers a case of a Punjabi woman in the UK who spent, I think, almost 8 or 9 years believing that this person existed, based out of a profile that was curated for her. But all along, it was the cousin or a common friend of that man who was doing this whole charade. And unfortunately, the person couldn't even be charged because catfishing was not considered a criminal offense in the UK when they finally found out what happened. However, in the process, so many lives were ruined, most specifically the girl who had to spend, you know, most part of her early 30s believing that she was with a man who was not even, he didn't exist.
Yeah, and I think it takes us very neatly into the role that technology has played
Yeah.
in dating recently and how it's contributing even today. So we're coming to part two or segment two of this episode, which is on the role of technology in dating and relationships today. I think everybody knows that technology has transformed how we find love, for better or for worse. While Gen X experienced technology through matchmaking websites, it was a very different experience for millennials and Gen Z. Social media and dating apps like Tinder completely changed the dating game and turned it into a marketplace. There are 75 million active monthly users just on Tinder, and 60% of them, approximately, are under the age of 35, which means that it's gotten a lot easier to find someone without having to do too much work. And a lot of Gen Z also use Instagram and TikTok, and they're the ones who popularize the phrase sliding into the DMs. Now, while technology has made dating a lot more convenient and accessible, personally, I'm not a very big fan of dating apps because I believe that it has turned dating into something super superficial because people swipe based on appearance, and this has turned relationships into something very short term because it doesn't incentivize you to work through problems that you may face since there's always someone better. But the thing that I dislike most about these dating apps is that it messes with your self-esteem and mental health. Goldie, we spoke about that, like you having to appear a particular way, which essentially means that you have to always know for a fact that you are not that person. You're always going to have to compare yourself to that person and feel like you're less than that.
Yeah.
And the stats to back it up as well. 50% of users report frustration with ghosting and the superficiality element of it. 70% of Gen Z dating app users feel the pressure to perform or curate a perfect online persona. And nearly 80% of long term dating app users said that they experienced emotional burnout or fatigue. And then there's the whole AI component. I think we touched upon it very briefly in a previous episode. AI girlfriends and virtual companions are becoming increasingly popular, and apps like Replica and other AI powered chatbots claim to provide emotional support and companionship. Globally, studies show that 70% of people engaging with AI companions admit to preferring them over human connections because they don't have to face the fear of rejection. Goldie, while technology has changed the dating game so significantly, I can't help but view it as a way for people to use it as a coping mechanism. I know you have your own views on technology and dating apps and such. I'd love to hear from you.
As a way to cope, that stuck with me. And I just want to take on that last statement and speak about when you meet somebody, whether it's through an application or in this case, through AI. One of the biggest, let's say, byproducts that could occur when you date somebody is that you have a breakup. It's one of the most normal things that could happen in a relationship. One would think that that's obvious. And yes, it is an obvious thing. However, what's happening with technology is that as a person who is going through that breakup, you are giving yourself less time to heal and overcome that breakup before stepping back into that game or dating app, or in this case, you actually use AI to cope from it. So that, for first starters, is a red flag for me. If you have a breakup, you need to give yourself to heal, time to heal. And traditionally, yes, we have seen people who go on rebound dates or they have rebound sex or any of that kind of stuff. Yes, of course it's happened, but that is also a form of healing that kind of comes in the way. It's an obstacle that you just have to overcome. But if you're just dismissing healing altogether and telling yourself, oh, I don't like this profile because this doesn't agree with me. Let me just go to the next one because I have a choice to make. Okay, so this is one big problem I'm having from people who are trying to use technology to cope with their emotional needs. And another thing that I notice is obviously going back to this whole idea of curated versus what is an acceptable standard of tolerable idiosyncrasies in a profile. So if you meet somebody in the park or at a party or at the pub, or you get introduced to somebody through a common friend, you have that option to gauge what is it that is acceptable for you about that person. Everyone has their quirks, and if someone has this habit of their knuckles click, you're not going to write that on your profile, but because you read what you want to read, you are going to believe that this person is a professional hiker, even though they've only gone hiking twice in their life, but they chose to put it on their profile. So the perception of what you read on a profile or what you see is what you are going to believe. However, if you meet the person, through somebody, your level of tolerance is much higher for what they show up and how they show up. They could be wearing a completely different outfit to what their photo showed, on the profile, but until you don't meet them, how are you going to know that they are more than just their profile? And this is the problem that I'm noticing as well with technology. You create this image, this visual of the other person. And the flip side of that is the person who's putting themselves out there is living with a day-to-day expectation of themselves and what to expect out there. And so this leads to things like loneliness. Men generally become more lonely, so they just go away from these apps. You yourself have said you're not a big fan of them. Women, on the other hand, are more known to have attachment issues. So they fall into this vicious circle of having to date and date again and date again. But then that becomes a movement of paranoia because they don't think they're good enough for anyone.
Yeah.
And one fine day, everybody hates dating, which is what we're seeing right now.
Yeah, yeah. It's just today. I was on YouTube. I just happened to see. I didn't watch the video, but I happened to see a thumbnail of a video with the title of um, like we broke dating and how to fix it, something along the lines of that. Um, yeah, you're absolutely right, Goldie. And as I was doing research for this episode, I came across a statistic which said that 75% of people on this platform are men.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the I find it quite ironic because millennials and Gen Z, who make up for majority of this, the populace who uses dating apps, because I mean 60% of Tinder users are 35 and under. Uh, what I find ironic is that for a generation or two generations that value shared values and authenticity and inclusiveness and openness and all these things, they are not always able to live those values,
Yeah.
especially in a world that has become so superficial because everything is so visual.
Yeah. Yeah. As you were talking about this and how a profile can create so much anxiety, it reminded me of an episode from the TV show Suits, which I know you've watched. And if our viewers do recognize the show, there is that one episode where Rachel is preparing her own online dating profile and she is going crazy because she doesn't know what to write. She has these really high expectations that she feels she cannot fulfill, and we all know how gorgeous Rachel is in the show, and it's Mike, her who ultimately ends up becoming her boyfriend, but he has to sit and remind her, well, can't you just say who you are, and this is who you would be, and he starts to narrate to her how he sees her. And that's a beautiful way to sort of maybe take on an idea in terms of, well, I don't know how to write my profile because I probably don't even know myself that well. Who knows me better? Let me ask that person to, to guide me to think what I should write. And that's interesting because when we ask our viewers to, constantly subscribe or like our episodes, or to follow us, 9 out of 10 times the people who do follow us come from somebody who's recommended us, right? And so dating is a little bit like that, right? Today, I will introduce you to so and so because I think you guys will get along. This is a traditional way that used to happen. Maybe we just need to come back to that a lot more.
Yeah, and I feel like we are going to be moving in that direction as we move towards the future, and that takes us on to the third and final part of
Mm,
this episode, which is what are the lessons we can learn from each generation about dating and relationships, and what does the future look
mm,
like as we move ahead. Now, to say that one generation's approach or experience of dating is the best would be wrong because there's so much to learn from each generation. Boomers teach us the importance of commitment, patience, and family values in relationships. Few weeks or maybe a few months back, I remember watching this video of this Indian boomer saying, today everybody is focused on finding the right person and being compatible with them. In our time, we didn't have the luxuries to do so we had to learn how to commit. I love
yeah.
that. Gen X teaches practicality and balancing individuality and independence within relationships. Millennials teaches the importance of emotional intelligence and shared values in relationships, and Gen Z teaches inclusivity and how mental health plays a massive role in the success of a relationship. How the future looks is anybody's guess. But I'm certain that technology and AI will play an even bigger role than they currently are. I'm expecting VR and AR to improve leaps and bounds, dating apps and the algorithms to become even better and more accurate with more data, and the rise of slow dating as a reaction to dating app burnout. Goldie, you and I are very bullish on the future generation, or rather Gen Alpha and beyond. What are some thoughts that you have about this?
I think the component of in person has always attracted me, maybe because I come from that cohort. I think there's something very special about knowing very little about the person until you find yourself a little surprise in front of you. Because I think less is definitely more, and that can be applied in this context. If I were to try and create the formula, maybe I'm thinking about it and I could be completely wrong, but merging this idea of let's get back into, meeting each other more face to face, but how? Well, I mean, I think having different interests, or similar interests rather, would be a starting point. So I know that there are things called clubs where you can go and meet people, just similar to a book club, or having retreats where you could all go and talk about personal growth, which is kind of the center in all of the retreat. But as a consequence of it, you could meet that special someone. But there has to be the spotlight cannot be on this is about you coming to meet someone, because that's where the pressure starts. Back when I was growing up and I was in my, late teen years, I remember we used to go away on these weekends with our parents where the focus of that weekend was to attend these spiritual discourses because people were on the same sort of path, as one may say. But you could also attend these weekends just to simply get social with individuals and meet young people from your community from different cities of Spain. And that's what I went for. I wanted to meet my friends that I knew from XYZ city and then meet new people. But there was never this focus on, I'm going to meet my life partner today, or I'm going to find myself a boyfriend. That would happen as a consequence, as a secondary byproduct, if it had to. So when you take away the focus and the pressure on what is the situation, you are more likely to be your authentic self, aren't you? So I think this idea in the future of just having opportunities to meet people, and aren't the best relationships stemmed from friendships? So why are we skipping that stage and going straight to I need to date somebody and make them my partner. What happened to the previous, stage of just getting to know someone? Let's warm up to each other and become friends, and then we can think about the future if there is one. So it's like, as I said, like an amalgamation of what each generation offers. The personal growth side of it is fantastic. I think Gen Z have sussed that out to the T. Maybe we Gen Xers never did that. We didn't focus on that so much. So if we took that and went and found a new friend and stemmed a new relationship based on that, and then you never know, that friend of yours could introduce you to some person who they feel is the perfect fit for you, or vice versa.
Yeah. So essentially, it's like you're taking an idea from what worked before and applying it to what really needs to happen now. Because clearly, what's happening right now
Yeah.
isn't does not seem like it's working out all that well. And what you mentioned about essentially meeting people or speaking to people with no agenda, I think
Yeah.
it's like going to a movie without watching the trailer or anything and just experiencing it from the beginning, no expectations, nothing, and being blown away.
Yeah.
That's the best outcome, right? You don't go in with anything, any expectations, and you are pleasantly surprised or extremely surprised.
Yeah.
And yeah,
And I think this idea of love at first sight, I mean, forgive me, I may be a romantic, but it's completely disappeared off the map of their vocabulary, essentially, hasn't it? Because you haven't seen, how are you going to be a love at first sight when you've already checked them out on Tinder, TikTok, and all the multiple platforms that they're present on, and
yeah,
seen probably about 50 or 60 pictures of them all over the internet?
that's true. When you put it that way, it's very true. Yeah, yeah, very interesting. I mean, again, every generation has, the way that they grew up is what dictates what kind of, life they live and what kind of dating life they end up experiencing as well, right? And I think that brings us towards the closing of this episode today, which is to start by saying that each generation's mindset around dating reflects the era in which they grew up in. But here's the thing: there is no one right way to go about dating. The only thing you have to really consider is why you're dating and finding help when you feel like you're straying away from your why. Each generation has so much to teach us about dating. When you internalize all these lessons, you will start prioritizing the relationship that determines your success in this area of life the most, which is your relationship with yourself. And that's how you actually mind the Gen Gap. If you enjoy this episode, do show us some love by sharing it with people who you feel would find this topic interesting. Your parents, your friends, your family, colleagues, or even your children. It may just be that spark to ignite a very, very fascinating conversation. And with that, we've come to the end of episode 21 of Mind the Gen Gap podcast. I've been your host, Lakshan.
And I've been your co host, Goldie.
Thank you so much for tuning in, watching, and listening all the way to the very end.
Muchas gracias por escucharnos.
Oof. See you in the next one.
Hasta pronto.
Bye.